Hello, I'm Dr. Sarah Williams, a pediatric specialist passionate about guiding parents through their child's physical, mental, and emotional growth journey. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works with children, what follows may change how you understand kids' entertainment and its real impact. Stay with me, because what we uncover today could be decisive for the future well being of the children you care about most. I'm Marian Rojas Estape, a psychiatrist, and I want to talk about something that may be shaping your child's emotional and psychological development without you noticing. Over years in my clinic, I've seen a worrying pattern. Children who are increasingly anxious or irritable, who struggle to manage feelings, and who swing from excitement to frustration in seconds. Again and again, a common factor appears: the content they consume every day. Today, we'll examine how certain seemingly harmless cartoons train young brains to expect constant stimulation and how that rewires motivation, attention, and sleep. I'll share real cases that will make you rethink what you press play on and then offer practical tools to protect healthy neurological and emotional growth. Let's start with what happens inside a child's brain when they consume fast audiovisual content. The nervous system in childhood is still developing, especially the regions responsible for attention, emotional self regulation, and sustained concentration. I remember Sophia, a 6 year old whose parents described her behavior as impossible. She could not stay still for more than 5 minutes, had bursts of unexplained aggression, and suffered constant nightmares. When we examined her daily routine, we discovered she spent more than 4 hours a day watching cartoons built around extremely rapid scene changes, saturated colors, and nonstop audio cues. Her brain was living at full speed. The problem with hyperstimulating shows is what I call addiction to stimulus. The child's brain gets used to needing higher and higher levels of input to feel satisfied. Everyday activities like reading a book, playing quietly, building with blocks, or having a simple conversation start to feel boring because they don't deliver the dopamine surge the brain has come to expect. Problematic cartoons often share specific traits: cuts every 2 or 3 seconds, shrill music with no pauses, characters who shout, and a cycle of constant conflict without constructive resolution. These elements keep the child's alert system switched on, creating a state of hypervigilance that is not natural for development. From a neuroscience perspective, we are looking at disturbances in key neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine, which underlies reward and motivation, spikes artificially and repeatedly during these programs. Over time, the brain develops tolerance and seeks even stronger stimuli to experience the same level of satisfaction. Here is the most troubling part: this imbalance does not end when the screen turns off, it spills into the rest of the child's life. I have seen children regularly exposed to this content struggle to enjoy activities that require sustained focus: studying, listening in class, falling asleep without background noise, or simply daydreaming peacefully. Their inner world grows noisy and silence becomes uncomfortable. Before we go further, reflect on why this matters. The goal is not to demonize all media, but to recognize patterns that quietly reshape a young nervous system. When a child's baseline is built on overdosed novelty, the ordinary texture of life, pauses, silence, patience, and gentle transitions, can feel empty. That mismatch fuels restlessness and a cycle where only louder, faster, and brighter seems good enough. Understanding this mechanism gives us the power to change it. In the next section, we will look at how repeated exposure also teaches dysfunctional emotional patterns and why children learn far more from modeled behavior on screen than from any instruction we give them. Stay tuned. Now let's talk about something that concerns me deeply as a mental health professional: how certain cartoons are teaching children distorted emotional patterns that later show up in their relationships, reactions, and behavior. Take the case of Alejandro, an 8 year old whose parents described his tantrums as uncontrollable. During therapy, I discovered that his favorite show repeatedly portrayed characters who solved conflicts through yelling, manipulation, and even funny violence. The message he had absorbed was simple: when you don't get what you want, the right response is to raise your emotional intensity until others give in. That belief was shaping how he handled frustration in real life. This brings us to a fundamental truth: children learn far more through modeling than through instruction. They don't just listen to what adults tell them, they copy what they see, both in their surroundings and on screens. When a child admires a cartoon character who gets results by shouting, lying, or humiliating others, that behavior becomes part of their emotional toolkit. Their brains, still forming the circuits for empathy and self control, absorb these scripts as if they were lessons about how the world works. For a child's brain, repeated exposure equals reality. There's no clear line between fiction and life yet. Many problematic cartoons rely on recurring toxic patterns. The first is the normalization of cruelty as humor. Characters hurt, mock, or betray one another, and the audience is invited to laugh. This teaches children that causing harm can be funny, that humiliation and pain are part of entertainment, and that empathy is unnecessary. The second pattern is the portrayal of intense emotion as the only valid form of expression. Characters scream, sob dramatically, or rage constantly, and because they dominate the narrative, calm communication looks dull or ineffective by comparison. Children internalize this idea that emotions must always be explosive to matter. The third toxic pattern is the lack of real consequences for destructive behavior. In many shows, a character can lie, be cruel, or destroy something, and by the next episode, everything is magically reset. There's no lesson learned, no accountability, no emotional continuity. When children see this repeatedly, they start to believe that actions exist without consequences, that damage can simply disappear. This mindset makes it harder for them to develop moral reasoning or understand responsibility. I once treated a 7-year-old named Camilla who had begun emotionally manipulating her parents using tactics straight out of her favorite cartoon. When she didn't get what she wanted, she would stage exaggerated crying fits, recite lines about how no one understood her, and play the victim until her parents gave in. They were unknowingly reinforcing the same patterns that the cartoon had modeled. Over time, Camilla's ability to express genuine emotions weakened because she had learned that performance worked better than honesty. The long term consequences of this emotional programming are significant. We are now seeing children reach adolescence without the tools for healthy emotional regulation, with unrealistic expectations about relationships, and with very little tolerance for frustration or boredom. From a psychiatric point of view, this is alarming because ages 3 to 10 are the critical window when the brain wires its emotional response patterns for life. During this period, constant exposure to dysregulated, exaggerated emotions doesn't just influence behavior, it physically shapes how neurons connect and communicate. One of the most damaging outcomes I've observed is the gradual erosion of sustained attention. Children raised on overstimulating media struggle to focus on tasks that require patience or depth. They are mentally trained to expect constant novelty. Their neural architecture adapts to that rhythm, rewarding quick changes and punishing stillness. Teachers describe classrooms filled with children who can't focus for more than a few minutes. It's not defiance, it's neurobiology. Their brains are no longer wired for sustained attention, but for fragmentation. In clinical practice, I've seen what I call fragmented attention syndrome. These children can't read more than a few paragraphs without craving new stimulation. They can't listen to a full explanation before their minds drift elsewhere. Even play, which should be their natural medium of creativity, becomes restless and shallow. They jump from one toy to another, unable to build narratives or finish what they start. This is the cost of continuous hyperstimulation. But perhaps the most heartbreaking loss is their inability to experience productive boredom. Boredom, contrary to popular belief, is not an enemy. It's one of the mind's most fertile states. When a child feels mildly bored, their brain shifts into what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a state crucial for creativity, introspection, and emotional integration. Overstimulated children lose access to this state. Instead of letting boredom inspire imagination, they experience it as anxiety and immediately seek external stimulation. This is why the quiet moments, so essential for reflection and creativity, have become unbearable for many children today. One of the most alarming effects I've observed in my clinical work is the systematic destruction of children's ability to sustain attention. And let me be clear, this is not an exaggeration. We're witnessing a real, measurable neurological change. The human brain evolved to alternate between periods of focused attention and moments of rest. However, modern overstimulating cartoons have rewired this rhythm. They have created an environment of constant sensory bombardment, and that intensity is literally reshaping the neural architecture of young minds. Let me tell you about Diego, a 9-year-old brought to my office because his teachers were worried about his inability to concentrate for more than 2 minutes. His parents described him as bright but always somewhere else, as if his thoughts were scattered beyond reach. When we analyzed his media consumption, we found that the shows he watched changed scenes, perspectives, and characters every 2 or 3 seconds. His brain had been trained to expect a new stimulus constantly. Remaining focused on one task for longer than a few seconds felt unnatural to him. This is where neuroplasticity comes in, the extraordinary ability of the developing brain to adapt to whatever stimulation it receives most consistently. The child's brain doesn't passively absorb media, it molds itself around it. If what it receives is quick, flashy, and fragmented, it builds networks optimized for shallow, short bursts of attention. These same networks are the opposite of what deep learning, imagination, or problem solving require. Academic performance, creativity, and emotional resilience all depend on the brain's capacity for sustained focus. When that foundation is eroded, everything else suffers. It's not that these children lack intelligence. Their neural wiring has simply been optimized for speed and novelty instead of reflection and continuity. I call this condition fragmented attention syndrome. Children who suffer from it cannot read more than a few paragraphs without an almost physical urge to look for something else. They can't listen through an entire explanation without their mind slipping away. Even play, the most natural, joyful activity of childhood, becomes restless. They abandon toys or games within minutes, moving on before imagination can even take root. Patience, focus, and contemplation, skills that once developed naturally through unstructured play, are now being replaced by a constant hunger for stimulation. What's even more concerning is the loss of what I call productive boredom. Many parents try to prevent their children from ever feeling bored, thinking it's a negative state. But boredom, in moderation, is vital for healthy brain development. When a child feels bored and doesn't immediately reach for a screen, their brain activates the default mode network, a neural system essential for creativity, introspection, and learning integration. In this quiet state, the child starts to imagine, to invent, to connect ideas, and to reflect. It is where curiosity and self-awareness are born. When children become overstimulated, this state of introspective rest disappears. Boredom turns into anxiety, not imagination. They become dependent on external stimuli to feel alive or entertained. Their ability to sit quietly, think deeply, or create from within fades away. Instead of using stillness as a gateway to creativity, they experience it as discomfort. And that discomfort drives an endless cycle of distraction and dissatisfaction. Teachers across the world are seeing this firsthand. Many tell me their classrooms are filled with students who physically cannot maintain attention during traditional lessons. It's not a question of discipline or motivation. Their brains have been rewired to process the world in flashes, not sequences. These children have trouble following multi-step instructions, finishing homework, or simply listening to a teacher for more than a few minutes. The tragedy is that their neurobiology has been conditioned for quick shifts of attention, leaving them unable to sustain focus long enough to experience deep engagement or learning. I'll never forget Anna, an 8-year-old girl who came to me terrified because she couldn't turn off her brain. She described it as having dozens of televisions playing inside her head at once. Her words captured exactly what overstimulation does. It floods the mind until quiet becomes impossible. Anna's case is a perfect example of a child whose brain had been pushed to constant overdrive, losing the ability to self-regulate. The most devastating part of this is that we are taking away from children one of the most profound human experiences, the ability to be present. Mindfulness, stillness, connection with beauty, and genuine human empathy all depend on that calm focus. Without it, joy becomes fleeting, attention becomes fragmented, and relationships lose depth. The good news is that the same neuroplasticity that allows this damage to occur also makes healing possible. The brain can rebuild healthier patterns through intentional change. In the next part, we'll explore proven strategies that parents can apply to help children recover focus, emotional balance, and joy without relying on constant digital stimulation. After hearing all this, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, but there is hope. The same neuroplasticity that allows overstimulation to harm the brain also makes recovery possible. I've witnessed remarkable transformations in children whose parents made conscious, gradual changes. The process starts with choosing the right kind of media. Healthy audiovisual content for children shares specific traits: a slower rhythm that allows time to process each scene, smooth transitions, calm music or natural pauses, and characters who resolve conflicts in constructive ways. The best programs integrate nature, patience, cooperation, and real-life problem-solving appropriate for the child's age. Still, change must be handled carefully. If a child is used to high stimulation content, removing it suddenly can cause resistance and even mild withdrawal symptoms. A gradual approach works best. Begin by reducing screen time bit by bit while introducing alternative activities, puzzles, art, music, or time in nature. These activities re-engage the same neural areas that overstimulation once hijacked, but in a healthy, balanced way. Nature, in particular, has an extraordinary restorative effect. The subtle complexity of leaves, the sound of running water, the gentle visual rhythm of clouds, all these patterns soothe the nervous system. It's as if nature itself recalibrates the child's brain, helping it rediscover calm and focus. Another effective strategy is progressive attention therapy. Start with short tasks, 3 to 5 minutes of concentrated focus, and gradually extend them. It can be as simple as observing a flower in detail or listening to a short piece of music with closed eyes. Over time, these exercises rebuild the brain's capacity for sustained attention. And remember, children learn by example. Parents must also model mindful focus and reduce their own digital distractions. A calm, present adult is the most powerful therapy a child can have. A crucial part of this healing process is the active involvement of parents. Children imitate what they see more than what they are told. So if adults are constantly distracted by their own screens, they unintentionally teach the same behavior. I often remind parents that attention is not taught through lectures but through example. One family I worked with, the Gonzalez family, decided to create what we called sacred screen free hours each evening. At first, both the children and the parents resisted, finding it difficult to disconnect. But after 3 weeks, something changed. The children began requesting those hours themselves because they rediscovered the joy of playing, talking, and simply being together. This is the power of shared presence. Families that co create media rules instead of imposing them tend to succeed more. When children are included in the discussion about how screens affect their minds and bodies, they become more cooperative and responsible. They understand why limits exist and feel part of the process rather than controlled by it. Parents should also know when professional help is needed. Some changes in behavior go beyond normal adjustment. Persistent nightmares, sleep disruption lasting more than 2 weeks, or ongoing anxiety related to content are red flags that the child's nervous system has been deeply affected. Other warning signs include sudden aggression, sexualized behavior inappropriate for age, or withdrawal from social interactions. In such cases, consulting a mental health specialist is essential, not as punishment, but as protection. The reassuring news is that most negative effects of overstimulation are reversible. With early intervention and a consistent home environment, the brain's resilience is extraordinary. The sooner families identify these patterns and act, the faster healthy development can be restored, emotionally, cognitively, and socially. Protecting children from the negative impact of overstimulating media isn't just about restriction. It's about creating an environment that actively nurtures healthy growth. Families who thrive in this process share a few key habits. They build what I call sacred spaces of connection, moments and places at home completely free of technology, devoted only to human interaction. Mealtimes without devices are one of the most powerful rituals. When families talk, listen, and share real experiences, children develop stronger emotional bonds and better communication skills. Reading together is another transformative habit. When children see parents reading for pleasure, not obligation, they internalize the value of focus and reflection. Similarly, free and unstructured play is essential. It allows children to follow their curiosity, face boredom, and transform it into creativity. Instead of filling every minute with activity, let them explore, imagine, and even get a little bored. That's where original thinking begins. Exposure to nature is non negotiable. You don't need a forest. Parks, plants, or simply watching clouds can reconnect children to natural rhythms. Nature restores balance, reduces anxiety, and strengthens attention. Music, especially when listened to actively or played on an instrument, also supports healthy neural development, integrating emotion and concentration. Practical skills like cooking, gardening, or crafts help children experience the satisfaction of focus and achievement. These activities teach patience and the joy of creating something meaningful with their own hands. In the end, the message is simple yet powerful. Small, consistent choices shape a child's mind for life. Every minute of mindful connection, every screen free meal, every walk outdoors builds resilience and peace. Parenting in the digital age isn't about rejecting technology, it's about guiding its use with awareness and love so our children can grow calm, curious, and deeply human in a noisy world.